You ever have someone just walk into your life like they own the place, and instead of standing up for you, your own family acts like it's perfectly fine? That's exactly what happened to me. An unemployed man I barely knew showed up at the apartment I rent from my parents and said, "I'll live here." My dad didn't just allow it, he encouraged it, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Stay with me, because what happened next will make you wonder how far family loyalty should really go. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 27 years old, and I work 2 jobs just to keep a roof over my head and some independence. The apartment I rent isn't anything fancy, just a small 2-bedroom unit in a quiet neighborhood. I rent it from my parents, who own a few properties. I've always paid on time, kept the place clean, and minded my own business. My dad, Robert, has always been a bit controlling and dismissive, and my mom, Linda, avoids conflict at all costs. It's not perfect, but I manage. One Tuesday evening, I came home from a long day at work, and there he was, a man I had never seen in my apartment before, standing in my living room like he belonged there. He introduced himself as Mark Dawson, 32, unemployed, and without shame, he said, "Your dad told me I can stay here for a while." My jaw practically hit the floor. I looked at him, then at my dad, who had apparently let himself in earlier. "What is this? Who is he? And why is he in my apartment?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Robert just shrugged, like I was the one overreacting. "Emily, calm down. Mark needs a place for a bit. You've got the space. It won't be a problem. It's my apartment. I pay rent," I reminded him, trying to keep my voice steady. Dad waved off my words. "Family helps family." I blinked. "He's not even related to us." Robert gave me that look, the one that meant the conversation was over whether I liked it or not. Mom stood in the doorway, avoiding eye contact, her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't say a word. Mark smiled faintly, as if he had already won, and sat himself comfortably on my couch. "Don't worry," he said. "I won't be any trouble." That first night, he watched loud TV until after midnight, leaving dirty dishes scattered in the sink. My home, my one safe space, already felt like it didn't belong to me anymore. And I had a sinking feeling in my stomach that this was just the beginning of something much worse. I tried to protest, but Dad shut me down before I could even get a full sentence out. "Emily, he needs a place to stay. Family helps family," he said firmly, like that was the end of the discussion. I stared at him baffled. "He's not family, Dad. He's a stranger. You can't just—" "Enough," Robert snapped, his voice sharp enough to slice through the air. "Don't be selfish. You have the room. It's not a big deal." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Mom standing in the kitchen doorway, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug. She didn't meet my gaze. That told me everything. She wasn't going to step in. She never did when Dad made up his mind about something. So that was that. No matter how uncomfortable I felt, Mark was staying. That first night was miserable. Mark sprawled out on the couch like it was his personal throne, shoes kicked off, a bag of chips in his lap. He flipped through TV channels for hours, finally settling on some loud action movie that shook the wall. I tried retreating to my bedroom, but the noise made it impossible to relax. Around midnight, I came out to grab a glass of water, and the living room looked like a snack aisle had exploded. Chip crumbs on the carpet, soda cans on the table, and the kitchen sink already filling with dirty plates. "Are you going to clean this up?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Yeah, later," Mark replied without looking away from the screen. "Don't worry about it." That was the first time I realized how entitled he was, like my home was his playground. The next morning, Dad stopped by to check in. He and Mark were already laughing together when I walked into the living room. Mark was telling some exaggerated story about how he had been down on his luck, but was ready to turn things around. Dad nodded along like they'd been lifelong friends. "See, Emily? He's not so bad once you get to know him," Robert said, his tone carrying that passive-aggressive edge. Mark smiled at me, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind that said, "I know your dad's on my side." I could already feel the shift in the air. My opinion didn't matter. My comfort didn't matter. Dad had made up his mind, and somehow Mark had already figured out how to stay in his good graces. I went to work that day with a knot in my stomach. I had no idea just how bad things were about to get, but I knew one thing. The balance of control in my own apartment had already started slipping away from me. Within a week, it felt like my apartment didn't belong to me anymore. Mark had slid into the role of main tenant so smoothly, it was like he'd rehearsed for it. I came home from work one Thursday and found 2 strangers sitting on my couch, eating pizza and drinking beer. Mark was in the kitchen, laughing and telling a story like he was hosting a party. I froze in the doorway. What is this?" I asked. "Oh, these are my friends, Jason and Kyle," Mark said casually. "We're just hanging out." I glanced at the coffee table, my coffee table, covered in greasy pizza boxes and empty bottles. "You didn't think to ask me first?" Mark gave me a lazy shrug. "Relax, Emily. We're not hurting anything." The next day, I noticed my armchair had been moved into the corner, the rug was rolled up against the wall, and the kitchen shelves were rearranged. My things, the way I'd set them up, had been completely ignored. It was subtle, but I felt my control over my own space slipping away with every little change. And the groceries, don't even get me started. The fridge was constantly half empty, no matter how recently I'd stocked it. My almond milk, my cheese, my meal prep containers, gone, replaced with cheap instant noodles and beer. When I confronted Mark about it, he smirked. "You've got plenty. Don't be stingy." I called Dad, hoping he'd finally see my point. But instead, he sighed. "Emily, can you just be nice? Stop acting selfish. He's going through a hard time." Selfish. That word stung more than I expected. I work 2 jobs, pay my own rent, keep the place clean, and now I was selfish for wanting basic respect in my own home? Something about the way Dad defended him nagged at me. That night, I called Rachel, my best friend, and vented. "It's like Mark has some kind of hold on my dad," I told her. Rachel hesitated. "Didn't your dad have some weird business deal years ago that went south?" That made me think. I remembered overhearing my parents argue once about Robert getting burned in a deal with someone named Dawson. I never got the details, but the name stuck. The next morning, I asked Dad outright, "How do you even know Mark?" He paused, just long enough for me to catch it. "We worked together once. Years ago. He hit a rough patch, and I'm just helping him out now." It wasn't the words that got me, it was the tone. Careful, defensive, like there was more to the story. That was the moment the first real crack in my trust appeared. It wasn't just that my dad was siding with Mark. It was that he knew something about him, something shady, and still chose him over me. It started small, just enough to make me second-guess myself. One Saturday morning, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. I sat up, still half asleep, and there was Mark, standing in the doorway like it was no big deal. "What are you doing?" I demanded, pulling the blanket up around me. "Relax," he said with a smirk. "I just needed to borrow a charger. Yours was sitting on the desk." "You don't just walk into someone's room," I snapped. He rolled his eyes. "It's not like I was snooping. Chill." And just like that, he walked out, taking the charger with him. I called Dad immediately, still rattled. "He came into my room while I was sleeping, Dad. That's not okay." Robert sighed like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "Emily, don't overreact. I'm sure he didn't mean anything by it. He's living there too, you can share." Share. It was my space. My furniture. My rent. My life. But none of that seemed to matter. A few days later, I overheard something that made my blood boil. I came home early from work and paused outside the living room when I heard Mark talking to Dad on the phone. "I'm trying, man, but she's just rude. Makes it really uncomfortable for me here," Mark said, his tone dripping with fake frustration. "I don't know how much longer I can stay if she keeps treating me like this." My heart pounded in my chest. He was twisting everything, playing the victim in my own home. That night, Dad called me. "Mark told me you've been cold and disrespectful. Emily, I'm asking you to be more welcoming. You're making him feel unwelcome in his own home." His own home? I couldn't believe the words coming out of my father's mouth. Dad didn't even notice my outrage. "Just try to get along. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Later, while I was cooking dinner, Mom quietly came into the kitchen. She glanced toward the living room to make sure Mark wasn't in earshot. "Don't push too hard," she said softly. "Your dad's set on helping him." I froze with the spoon in my hand. "So what? I just let him do whatever he wants." Mom looked away. "Sometimes it's easier to let things run their course." Her voice was calm, but her eyes told a different story. She knew this was wrong, but she wasn't going to stand up to Dad either. That night, I locked my bedroom door, even just to sleep. But the truth was sinking in fast. Locking my door wouldn't stop Mark from trying to take more, and it wouldn't stop Dad from defending him every single time. It was a Thursday evening when I finally snapped. I'd had a long, exhausting shift, and all I wanted was to get into my room, change into sweats, and relax. But when I opened my bedroom door, something felt off. My throw blanket was crumpled on the bed instead of folded at the foot. A jewelry box I always kept on my dresser was slightly open. My desk chair had been moved. Then I saw it. The spare key that I kept hidden in the kitchen drawer was gone from its usual spot. My stomach dropped. There was only one person who could have taken it. I stormed into the living room, and there was Mark, sitting on the couch scrolling through his phone like nothing had happened. "Were you in my room?" I demanded. He didn't even look up. "Yeah. Needed to grab something." "You needed to break into my locked room?" My voice was shaking with anger. He shrugged. "You had a key in the drawer. If you didn't want me in there, you shouldn't have left it there." My hands curled into fists. "You took things, didn't you? My silver bracelet is gone, and so is the cash I had in my desk." Mark laughed, like I'd just accused him of stealing a candy bar. "You're imagining things." I called Dad immediately, my voice trembling as I explained everything. Instead of outrage, I got a cold sigh. Emily, you're overreacting, Robert said. He probably borrowed something and forgot to put it back. Stop making this into a drama. Dad, he went into my locked room. I yelled. Robert's tone shifted from dismissive to sharp. If you can't live peacefully with Mark, maybe you need to reconsider staying there. And if you're going to keep causing problems, I might have to raise your rent to make it worth the trouble. It felt like someone had punched me in the chest. My own father was threatening to make my life harder, not to protect me, but to protect him. I stood there in my kitchen, phone still in my hand, trying to process the fact that my dad had chosen a freeloading stranger over his own daughter. Mark glanced at me as I hung up, that smug little grin on his face, the kind that said, I'm untouchable. I went into my room, locked the door, and sat on the bed. My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. I couldn't, because somewhere deep down a switch had flipped. That was the moment I realized my parents weren't going to protect me. Not from Mark. Not from anyone. If I wanted this to end, I'd have to protect myself, and I was already starting to think about how I was going to do it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the apartment made me wonder if Mark was in my room again. By morning, I was running on caffeine and frustration. I needed to talk to someone who would actually listen. I called Rachel on my lunch break. She was my best friend, the kind of person who could hear 2 sentences from me and know exactly what I meant. As soon as I told her about the key, the missing bracelet, and my dad's reaction, she didn't hesitate. Emily, this isn't going to stop on its own, Rachel said firmly. You can't just hope he'll leave. You need to take control before you lose everything. Your stuff, your space, and maybe even your safety. I know, I sighed. But my dad has made it pretty clear he's not on my side. Then stop waiting for him to be. Handle this yourself. But you'll need proof. People like him? They lie until they're backed into a corner. Her words stuck in my head long after the call ended. That night, while Mark was out, I started. I took photos of the mess he left in the kitchen, the beer cans scattered on the coffee table, the stack of unpaid bills in his name that had started showing up in our mailbox. Over the next week, I recorded short videos on my phone. His friends taking over the living room, him eating food straight out of my grocery bags, him leaving the front door unlocked. Nothing dramatic, just small, undeniable snapshots of the chaos he brought into my life. Then I got curious. If Mark was this bad now, what was his history? I spent a night combing through Facebook profiles, old public records, and mutual connections. That's when I found it, post after post from people warning others about him. He'd been kicked out of 2 other apartments for borrowing things that never came back. He'd overstayed his welcome with a distant cousin until they changed the locks. And the kicker? There was an old news article about a police report filed after he used someone else's name to open a store credit account. The name wasn't my dad's, but suddenly I understood why Robert had been so defensive. Maybe he knew Mark had a shady past, and for some reason, he didn't care. By the end of that week, I wasn't scared anymore. I was angry, and more than that, I was ready. I wasn't going to just move out and let him win. No, I wanted him gone, and I wanted my dad to see exactly who he'd been defending. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of control returning. I had a plan now. Quiet, steady, and patient. I was going to turn this whole thing around, and Mark wasn't going to see it coming. Once I decided I wasn't just going to survive this, but end it on my terms, everything I did became intentional. I didn't want a screaming match or a dramatic blow-up. I wanted quiet, undeniable proof, the kind that couldn't be talked away. The first step was cutting off his easy access to my things. I stopped buying groceries for the shared fridge altogether. At the end of a long workday, I would swing by the store, buy only what I needed, and put it in a small, lockable mini fridge I bought online. I kept it in my room, along with a small stash of snacks. The first time Mark opened the fridge and found it nearly empty, his face twisted in confusion. Hey, when are you doing the next grocery run? He asked, as if I was his personal supplier. I'm on a budget, I said with a shrug. Just getting what I need. He didn't like that answer, but he didn't push. Not yet. Next, I set up a small, cheap camera hidden on my bookshelf. It pointed toward my desk and dresser, where I kept anything even slightly valuable. It wasn't high-tech, but it was enough to see if someone came into my room while I was gone. At the same time, I started quietly moving my valuables to Rachel's apartment, jewelry, important documents, sentimental things. Every time I visited her, I brought a bag under the excuse of donating or spring cleaning. In reality, I was emptying my room of anything I couldn't afford to lose. It didn't take long for Mark to notice things weren't going his way anymore. He started making passive-aggressive comments in the kitchen. Funny how you used to keep the fridge full, he muttered. Funny how you used to knock before walking into my room, I replied flatly. He scowled but didn't respond. That week, I caught him twice on camera. Once, opening my dresser drawer and rifling through my clothes. Another time, picking up a small box from my desk, shaking it, then putting it back. Watching the footage made my blood boil, but it also gave me exactly what I wanted, proof. The tension in the apartment was thick. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was short and sharp. I could feel him getting irritated that his free ride was getting bumpier. He'd pace the living room in the evenings, sometimes muttering under his breath when he thought I couldn't hear. But I didn't react. Not yet. Because the beauty of revenge isn't in rushing it. It's in letting the other person feel like they're slowly losing control without understanding why. And with every locked snack, every empty fridge shelf, and every secret camera clip, Mark was getting closer to realizing he wasn't the one in control anymore. I was. The breaking moment came on a Tuesday night. I'd just gotten home from my evening shift and decided to check the footage from my room camera. I'd been in the habit of scanning it every couple of days, expecting to see the usual snooping. But this time, it wasn't just snooping. There was Mark walking into my room in broad daylight, glancing around like a cartoon thief, then going straight to my wallet on the desk. He opened it, pulled out 2 bills, and shoved them into his pocket before leaving like nothing happened. My heart was pounding as I replayed it, just to be sure. It was clear as day. I knew this was the kind of thing even my dad couldn't shrug off, unless I gave him no choice. 2 days later, I got my second piece of ammunition. I was chatting with a cashier at the local hardware store when he casually asked me if Robert wanted the rest of the items he'd put on his tab last week. My stomach dropped. My dad doesn't keep tabs anywhere. He pays immediately. I pressed the guy for details, and sure enough, the Robert Carter, who'd been charging items, wasn't my dad at all. The description was unmistakable. It was Mark. That was it. I decided to strike when both my parents were home. It was a Saturday afternoon. Mark was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone, and my parents were in the kitchen. I walked in holding my laptop, my voice calm. "Dad, Mom, we need to have a quick family talk," I said. Robert barely looked up. "If this is about rent again, it's about Mark." I set my laptop on the table and pressed play. The footage filled the screen, Mark stealing from my wallet. No commentary, no interruptions, just the cold truth in 1080p. Linda's eyes went wide. Robert stiffened. Mark shifted uncomfortably, but stayed silent. "That's not what it looks like," Robert finally said, his voice tight. "Oh, it's exactly what it looks like," I said. "And here's something else." I pulled out my phone and played the recording I'd made at the hardware store, where the cashier described the man using my dad's name to run up debt. Robert's jaw clenched. He glanced at Mark, who suddenly looked very interested in the "You're twisting things," Robert tried again, but his voice had lost its edge. Linda was watching him closely now, and I could see the doubt in her eyes. "This isn't twisting anything," I said. "This is proof. And if you don't handle it, I will." For once, Robert had nothing to say. The silence was heavier than any shouting match we'd ever had. Mark mumbled something about needing to make a call and slunk out the door. Robert didn't follow. For the first time, he couldn't cover for him. It was too public, too undeniable. And I wasn't done yet. The day after I showed my parents the footage, I decided to finish what I'd started. Having proof was one thing. Making sure Mark could never wriggle out of it was another. I dug through the notes I'd taken over the past few weeks and found the number for one of the businesses Mark had been using. It was a small auto parts shop downtown. I called and introduced myself, then explained I was following up on some unpaid charges under Robert Carter. The owner confirmed it immediately, his voice dripping with frustration. "Yeah, he came in here, ordered a bunch of parts, said Robert Carter would cover it. Been dodging my calls ever since." I asked him to describe the man. Sure enough, it was Mark, down to the worn leather jacket and scruffy beard. I told the owner it wasn't Robert at all, and I had proof of who it really was. He said if that was true, he'd happily hand it over to the police. Perfect. That night, I asked my parents to sit down again. Mark was already home, lounging in the living room like nothing had happened. When I walked in with a folder under my arm, his eyes narrowed. "What now?" he scoffed. I dropped the folder on the table. Inside was printed camera footage, my written notes, and the owner's signed statement from the auto parts store. "This," I said, "is everything you've been doing. The theft, the lies, the debt in Dad's name. And I've already sent copies to the store owner, so even if you destroy this, it won't matter." Mark leaned back, smirking. "You can't prove I stole anything. And the debt? Could have been anyone." I didn't bother arguing. I just pulled out my phone and played the part where the store owner described him perfectly, ending with, "That's the guy who owes me money." Robert's face turned red, not from anger at me, but from sheer humiliation. For a man obsessed with control and appearances, this was the worst blow possible. "You've embarrassed this family," he snapped at Mark, his voice shaking. "You've embarrassed me." Mark started shouting, trying to spin it into me being vindictive and making things up. That's when the knock came at the door. 2 officers stood there, polite but firm, holding a copy of the statement I'd provided. They spoke with Mark briefly, and within minutes, he was gathering his things under their supervision. I watched him walk out, still muttering under his breath, but with no power left. The door closed behind him, and the apartment was finally quiet. The story didn't end there, though. A few days later, word of what happened reached our extended family. Robert couldn't spin it, not with so many witnesses and police involvement. I heard from Rachel that at a family barbecue, one of my uncles straight up asked him how it felt to get conned by a freeloader. He didn't answer. He just walked away. And for me, that silence was almost as satisfying as watching Mark leave for good. After Mark was gone, the air in the apartment felt lighter, but the damage was still there. I'd lost trust in my own parents, especially my dad. I knew if I stayed, something like this could happen again. I wasn't going to let that happen. A week later, I sat down with Robert and Linda at the kitchen table. My voice was calm, steady, the kind of calm that comes when you've already made up your mind. I'm moving out, I said. And when I go, I'm cutting all financial ties. No rent to you, no favors, no shared bills. I'll find my own place and handle everything myself. Robert frowned like he couldn't believe I was serious. You can't just. I can, I interrupted. And I will. After what happened, I need to be somewhere I'm respected. If that can't happen here, then I'm leaving. Linda looked sad but didn't argue. Robert tried a few more times to guilt me, but I stayed firm. By the end of the month, I had found a small, one-bedroom apartment across town. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. No one could walk in uninvited. No one could take over my space. Moving day was quiet. Rachel helped me load boxes into her car, and I didn't even ask Robert for help. As we drove away, I felt this mix of relief and sadness. Relief because I was free, sadness because this was my own family, and they'd failed me. A few days after settling in, Robert called. I let it ring the first time. When he called again, I picked up. You don't have to cut us off completely, he said. We're still your family. I took a deep breath. Family doesn't treat me like I'm disposable. You chose a stranger over me and didn't protect me when it mattered. I won't live like that again. If you want to be in my life, it's going to be on my terms, not yours. There was silence on his end, and for once, I didn't feel the need to fill it. I hung up knowing I'd said everything I needed to. That night, I sat on my small couch with a cup of tea, looking around my new place. The fridge hummed quietly. The floor was clean because I'd cleaned it. The lock on my front door was solid, and the only key was in my pocket. No shouting from the other room. No dishes piled up by someone else. No fear of who might be in my space when I got home. Just silence. And for the first time in months, maybe even years, I realized how good silence could feel. It wasn't empty. It was safe. It was mine. I smiled, leaned back, and let myself enjoy it. I wasn't just living alone. I was living free, completely in control of my own life. And I wasn't giving that up for anyone. So what's your take? Was Emily right to cut ties and build her own life? Or should she have given her parents another chance? Share your thoughts down in the comments. I'm curious to hear your side. And if you like reading stories like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you'll always know when the next one's up.